Simone Biles on the balance beam. Spoiler alert, we've got the results. The U.S. hits 70% of adults partially vaccinated. And Wall Street has a new minimum wage. Tuesday Need to Know. Let's go. Good morning. This is Cheddar's Need to Know podcast for Tuesday, August 3rd. I'm Jill Wagner with Carlo Versano. Hi, Carlo.
Morning, Jill. How you doing today?
I had a little incident at my coffee cart this morning for the first time ever. For the first time in basically 7 years of going to a coffee cart when it's still dark out, I got not harassed, but like kind of some guy came up to me and was not leaving me alone. And basically I bought him a cup of coffee. The irony is that I feel like he thought I was probably scared of him because of just like crime, but I was more like, you're not wearing a mask and you're a foot away from my face. Right. And I was concerned about COVID, but not to, extrapolate too much from that one incident, but I moved out to the burbs, but people, we've been hearing about crime and just loitering, etc. I don't know if I'm going back to that coffee cart in the morning. I only went this morning because I ran out of my own creamer that I bring to work, my own coffee creamer. So anyway, just a little bit of a startling wake up today. That's
I have to say, Lower Manhattan is still, it feels like the Twilight Zone.
It's like a ghost town.
In the early morning. We have got to get people back into the office. I say from my remote location here. But seriously, I think after Labor Day, I think that we got to get vaccine mandates everywhere, and we got to get people back to the office.
No, it's scary. It honestly was scary. I used to go, when I worked at the New York Stock Exchange and I was working for CBS, I was in at 3 a.m. At 3 in the morning, I used to go get coffee, and nobody's ever come. I've never had an experience like that. This was 6 a.m., and the sun was already almost up. Scary stuff. Want to mention, we're going to talk about Olympic spoilers, so this is your time to turn the podcast off if you want. For a couple minutes.
Okay. All right. And go.
All right. So we're going to start at the Olympics. Simone Biles just won a bronze medal on the balance beam in her return to competition in Tokyo. Guan Chen, who's 16 from China, took gold. Tang Ziqing, also of China, took silver. Team USA's Suni Lee, she did not medal. She wobbled a bit on the beam. But for the most part, she had a really rock-solid routine. Yeah. With her bronze, though, Biles now ties the record for the most Olympic medals won by an American gymnast. This is likely her last Olympics. I heard her saying that maybe she would go in 24 to be a specialist. I don't know what that means, though. If she would just kind of be working with the other team members, I don't know. But likely this is the last we're going to see her performing at this level.
So good. That's amazing. Great. I'm so happy for her, for Team USA. The gymnasts have just been killing it. China, by the way, still leads the U.S. in terms of gold medals, 32 to 22, though the U.S. does lead the overall medal count. And a lot of folks I noticed on social media, especially folks who don't live in this country, sort of making fun of the overall medal count in U.S. Media outlets about how it's sort of meaningless and it's the gold count that really matters. So who knows? Whatever. But China leads. We still lead in the overall medal count. I do have to eat a little crow this morning, Jill. Time to eat some crow over here. Yesterday, I made one of the dumber errors that I've made in a while. I conflated the men's soccer win in the Gold Cup with the Olympics final. The men's team did not even qualify for the Olympics this year, which I knew somehow, and I just still messed that up. So anyway, the men's soccer team did win the Gold Cup final against Mexico. They did not win, and they did not even play in the Olympics. The women are lost to Canada in the Olympics.
I need to start listening closer to what you say, Carlo. Was that on the? Did you say that on the podcast? I don't know how. I know you wrote it in the newsletter because we got some emails there. Yes, and then I will apologize then for not catching it.
That's okay. It happens. It happens. Also, just one more thing on Biles. I may have yesterday made it seem like I was like, talking about how her serious mental health issues weren't really a mental health problem. That was the opposite of what I meant to say. I didn't mean to delegitimize her struggle at all. I was trying to sort of make this half-baked point that this thing that she was going through that they call the twisties is really more like a physical injury than a mental block, because if you're a gymnast and you can't turn, that's like a basketball player who breaks his hand. Like, it's not like it's just in your head. But anyway, I didn't make that point very well. And we got a couple people who emailed who said that I was delegitimizing her mental health struggles, and for that, I apologize.
So I read this Washington Post op-ed that I want to read a little bit from, because I thought it made a really good point about some of the coverage of the Olympics, and perhaps, I'll just read it. It's by Richard Zoglin. He writes, is NBC to blame for Simone Biles' Olympic withdrawal? I am overstating the case, of course, but to understand Biles' decision to step back for much of the gymnastics competition at the Tokyo Games, it's hard to ignore the elephant in the room, the orgy of hype, hero worship, and home team hyperventilating that has come to define NBC's coverage of the Olympics. Somehow, sooner or later, something like this had to happen. The nightly drama, of course, requires compelling characters, and Biles filled the bill perfectly. The 4'8" dynamo from the 2016 Rio Games, returning for a rare second shot at Olympic gold, was subject to the kind of adulation and buildup that no amateur athlete has ever endured. The greatest of all time, creator of 4 moves so unique and difficult that they bear her name. You can't compare her to anybody or anything. Nobody's ever shined brighter on the stage. History books again. Those were just a few of the effusions from NBC's commentators when she won her 7th U.S. national championship in June. Competing at the Olympics, especially in a sport so demanding of mental focus and physical precision, is pressure enough. Doing it under the glare of a TV network that has built you up as the star of its Olympic miniseries. Can anyone blame Biles for taking a break amid the stress?
I see that point.
I mean, as he even says, he's overstating it, right? Like, there's no one reason for anything. But, the pressure that NBC feels, we both worked at that network. There's a lot riding on the Olympics in terms of their bottom line. They pay a ton of money for the rights to air it. They spend a lot of money on coverage. Think about just all of the reporters, producers in hotel rooms, camera setups, the photographers, and just what goes on. And already we know that the coverage that viewership is way down. And it's not just Olympics, it's all live sports, but particularly, obviously, for them, this hurts. They're already having to do kind of like make goods where, advertisers, I guess, are promised a certain amount of coverage, of viewership. And if they don't get it, they'll have to compensate with something else.
They're going to get Sunday Night Football.
Pretty much. Yeah, that's kind of what they're thinking.
I think it's a valid point, and it's NBC, but if it were any network, it would be the same story, right? You need these narratives to get people to watch, to get people to care about sports that they typically don't really care about, except for once every 4 years. And this is what happens. I think that, again, it's probably overstating it a little bit because, this is not something new. I think what's new is just the social media angle to everything.
Right.
And just these people must just feel like they're always on at all times and just have to be performing, and they're trending, and they have to respond to people online, and people are saying nasty things about them. It's a hard way to live.
I almost think if I were competing at that level, I would just go off social media.
Oh, absolutely.
Unless they feel unless somebody's saying, no, you have to do this on social media. And it's funny, like I actually love NBC's coverage of the Olympics, at least in previous years. This year I didn't really get to watch much, but I do, because they build up these athletes and we learn so much about them, I do have this vested interest in them, and it makes the games that much more enjoyable because you're like, okay, I'm rooting for this person. I'm not just rooting for Team USA or this, a random name. And admittedly, I will say, until Simone Biles really came out and talked about her mental health, I'd never thought about what kind of the pressure that must put additionally on these athletes. And in some ways, you would think, if the media is building up, you want that, right? You waited your whole career for the attention. Yeah. But there is the downside of it as well.
Well, I think it's also a double-edged sword, right? Because there's people like Simone Biles who are going to be who are wealthy and have endorsement deals that can carry them through their careers. But a lot of these sports, a lot of these athletes, they're not making a lot of money out there, right? This is like, you made this point a while ago with the breastfeeding Canadian basketball player. Like, she's just like a journeywoman basketball player in Canada. She's not rich. She's not making a bunch of money. I think that's how a lot of these athletes are, which means they have to take they want it in some ways to get the endorsement deals. They want to get the media coverage because that's going to help their careers. But like you said, it comes at a cost, right?
Okay, a month later than President Biden had hoped, the U.S. has finally reached the milestone of having 70% of adults at least partially vaccinated. Public health officials say that benchmark should be considered a floor rather than a ceiling, especially as the Delta variant continues to rip through under-vaccinated areas. Here in New York, Governor Cuomo asking private businesses like restaurants to require vaccinations, while New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio stopping short of calling for a new mask mandate for vaccinated New Yorkers. Apparently, now that COVID is spreading so rapidly around the country, that 70% threshold or whatever we needed for herd immunity has gone up. Because when the virus is, you need just say 70% or whatever that number was if the virus was sort of spreading at a low level. But because it's like out of control right now, you really need almost 90. You need a lot more people to be vaccinated to have herd immunity.
Yeah, we're not getting herd immunity. We never were, and we certainly aren't now. So we have to learn once again to live with this virus in our lives. In Congress, I just wanted to mention this. Senator Lindsey Graham tested positive for a breakthrough case of COVID yesterday. He's fully vaccinated, of course, and he said that without vaccination, quote, my symptoms would be far worse, which of course is the right message to send. So good on Senator Graham for sending it. I got another email yesterday, Jill. I got a lot yesterday.
I actually turned to Michael at one point because I was sitting with him when I was checking my email. I'm like, man, oh man, they're coming for Carlo today.
so
and I was sort of enjoying it.
Oh,
just kidding. I know. Okay. I was just watching you. I was seeing the emails and watching you respond, and I just sat back and watched because I've been on that end before.
Yes, and that's quite all right. And if you're in this business, you are. You got to have thick skin. It's all good. But I have to say, I was a little bit offended though, and I was hurt because somebody said that they refer to me in their apartment as the guy with the bad COVID opinions, and and look, I mean, I will take criticism for anything, and I will always say when I think I'm wrong. But I don't think that's fair at all. I think you and I have been so on the ball on this pandemic from Jump Street, and I don't think that I've been anti-science, as somebody said. But if I have, and if somebody thinks that I have said something that is not true or misanalyzing something, please tell me. I want to know. I am not in the business of saying stuff that is wrong, especially when it comes to this virus. Just make sure that if you want to tell me, you email me or send me a DM on Twitter. Don't send me anything on Instagram. I do not check those DMs. Every once in a while I check them, and they're an absolute bloodbath.
Don't slide into his DM. That's what you're saying.
If you
send me an old-fashioned email.
Need2Know@Cheddar.com. That hits Jill and I. That's the way to do it.
One of the ways, just to quickly think about these breakthrough infections, one number that I heard was like, just say you have 165 million Americans who are fully vaccinated against COVID right now. Even if 1% were to get a breakthrough COVID infection, that's still 1 million people, right? That's still 1 million Americans who've been fully vaccinated who may get COVID. And you may know one. You're probably going to know one of them, or two of them.
Or know somebody who knows somebody.
Exactly. So you're going to start hearing those stories. Yeah. But all of those people wind up being fine. And I was even listening to this interview with a nurse who's on the front lines of this thing in emergency rooms down south, and she was saying, even when the rare cases where people who are vaccinated come into the hospital, she's like, it's a different ball game than it's when it's an unvaccinated person. They come in, they might just need a little oxygen, and they're out. It's not like these long stays where they're there for weeks and weeks, and they leave, because that's the difference. They come into the hospital and they leave versus other people who come in, they're not vaccinated. And it's as we know, sometimes the result is not good. It's just a different way to think about these breakthrough infections.
It's an important point.
Okay, 2 more police officers who responded to the Capitol riot have died by suicide, their department announced, which brings the number of known suicides among police who worked the Capitol that day to 4. Gunther Hashida of the Metro D.C. Police was found dead at home last week. Fellow Metro officer Kyle DeFreitig was found dead earlier last month. His death was confirmed by the department just hours after they announced Hashida's death. Their suicides follow those of Capitol Police Officers Howard Liebengood and Metro Police Officer Jeffrey Smith, who both took their lives in the days after January 6th.
Truly truly awful. Plus, of course, there's Brian Sicknick of the Capitol Police. He died of a stroke the next day. I mentioned him because his death was considered a line of duty death. These 4 officers who died by suicide are not, which means that their families don't get the same benefits. They don't get the same pension payouts, to say nothing of the pageantry and the pomp that sort of surrounds a line of duty death when an officer dies at work. In D.C., the law says that the fatality must be the, quote, sole and direct result of an on-duty injury and not one caused by a, quote, intention to bring about his own death. So, I mean, this is something that they have to change. Congress needs to step up and make sure that the family members and the spouses of these 4 men get absolutely the same benefits that their other fallen officers deserve, because there's no question that this event is having long-lasting impacts on a lot of people, including the police who tried in vain to protect that building that day.
We're not the only country fighting wildfires made worse by extreme weather. The EU has now sent planes to Turkey to help battle wildfires that are raging out of control along that country's famed turquoise coast. The Turkish government is facing growing anger at home for its inability to bring the situation under control after a week of fires that have blackened the coastline and forced evacuations of resort towns. The wildfires have been exacerbated by a heat dome that has been parked over southeastern Europe for days. Sound familiar? I feel like,
does,
I
right?
mean, it's the same story everywhere.
Yeah, these heat domes where this high pressure system traps the heat that would otherwise dissipate, they're just becoming more common. There's been 5 over the northern hemisphere just in the last couple of weeks. 5. They're like parked, they're like lined up like in a parking lot almost. It's kind of crazy. Greece coming within a degree yesterday of Europe's all-time heat record, 47 degrees centigrade. That's about 116 degrees Fahrenheit in Athens yesterday.
It has just been such a hot summer. I mean, there's nothing really to say about it. But there's this. I recommend if you're interested in global warming and what's going to happen to the planet with the temperatures rising, the UN actually did this really cool thing on social media where they compared what would happen if the temperature rises 1 degree, 2 degrees, or 3 degrees, and just how dramatic that difference is. And I know this is an example that I've talked about before, but I think it's just, in case you haven't heard it, it's a great way of thinking about just what a minor difference in temperature means for the planet. If you think about what it does to your own body, right? So our natural temperature, 98.6 degrees. For some reason, I'm like 97 is my natural temperature, but
I'm like 99.
So if I have 99, I'm usually pretty sick. Yeah. But think about just if you have a fever of 1 degree, you don't feel great, right? I mean, 2 degrees, you're probably pretty sick. 3 degrees, as an adult, if you have a fever of 3 degrees, 102, you're probably like not getting out of bed for quite a while. So just think about that in terms of the planet, and you can see how it doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a big deal.
Apropos of absolutely nothing, Jill, one of the things about COVID that I learned about myself was that because when they blast you with the forehead thermometers, every time I go into a place, they're like, "Yeah, dude, I think you're sick, man." And you're like 99, like 99.2. I'm like, "No, I just run really hot. I'm fine."
And I run I'm usually in the 97 range.
Yeah, you're like Becky.
Okay, there is a new minimum wage on Wall Street. Goldman Sachs is the latest and among the last of the Wall Street power hitters to raise its base salary for junior bankers. First-year analysts at Goldman, who are typically just out of college, will be paid $110,000 plus bonus. That's up from an $85,000 starting salary. Rivals like Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, and Barclays have already raised their base salaries above $100K, meaning that the entry-level investment banking jobs at all of these top firms now start at over 6 figures.
Good work if you can get it. These, of course, a lot of them, the same people who are belly aching about going back to the office. I just know that anecdotally because I happen to know a lot of people in this industry. And I mean, if you're 22 years old and you're making 6 figures in your first job, I don't want to hear you complain about anything ever, especially about having to work from home or wanting to work from home. There's just too much money for that age. I mean, making $100,000 as like a 22, 23-year-old, I just feel like that would be a disaster for me personally.
Well, most of it is, that's even an understatement, actually, because usually it's
the bonus, yeah.
Right. Where they make. But Look, I think, I mean, you have a target on Wall Street, I guess, because you're on the East Coast and maybe you know some bankers that rub you the wrong way. But this is what these banks have to do if they want to compete with Silicon Valley.
Absolutely.
I mean, so it's basic.
Yep.
So do you think an engineer who makes $100K, is that too much? I mean, I don't know. I don't totally buy your argument that salary should be tied to age, but
well, it's not. I don't think that they should be tied to age. I just think that $100,000 for a 22-year-old is a lot of money. And
no,
look,
it totally is.
It's a free market. They can make however much the market will pay them. My point is more like I just keep hearing from people in this industry, in the financial services industry, saying like, "Oh, they're making us go back to the office." It's like, dude, you're making like $250,000 to move numbers around on a computer screen. Don't complain about that. Like, you have a pretty good gig going. That's all.
Okay, talk about a good gig, a big entertainment deal. Reese Witherspoon's production company, Hello Sunshine, has been sold to a newly formed media venture backed by the private equity giant Blackstone. The deal values Hello Sunshine at about $900 million. It's an eye-popping sum given that it doesn't own a big library of content. But Witherspoon and her media arm have been behind several hit streaming series, including The Morning Show, Little Fires Everywhere, and Big Little Lies.
I saw all three of those shows. They were all good. I thought Big Little Lies was obviously excellent. Little Fires Everywhere, also quite good, and The Morning Show was pretty good too.
So I loved The Morning Show and I loved Big Little Lies, and then Little Fires Everywhere threw me off. I was like, is that Big Little Lies? Like the name was too similar or something. My brain couldn't process it. Where is that show? Where does that live?
I want to say it's Hulu. It's with Kerry Washington and the other lady. Oh God, and I'm turning into my mother here. Anyway, Amazon, of course, bought MGM for its library, like the James Bond movies. This new venture essentially buying Reese Witherspoon. But it just speaks to having a celebrity-backed brand, really more than anything else, right? But credit where it's due. I mean, even if she's just producing those shows, they're all hits. And if you have a streaming hit, you're making money off of it these days.
And not only that, what I'm particularly impressed with also is that she's managed to produce them and star in some of them. She's in The Morning Show. She's in Big Little Lies. She's great in them. She just has a knack, I think, for what I appreciate, because there's just such a lack of regular big picture movies that I'm interested in watching as a woman who's, of my age. There's just nothing, like, I'm not going to see the movies to see a superhero flick. When I'm looking for content, her type of stuff is appeals to me. And I feel like many movie producers anyway have kind of like forgotten that my demographic exists.
And she's one of the ones who has not. And good for her for getting paid.
Quick want to mention Kathy Griffin recovering from surgery to remove part of her lung after revealing that she'd been diagnosed with lung cancer. She says the cancer's in the early stages. She expects to recover. Griffin told ABC's Nightline that a tumor was discovered in her lung a few weeks ago. Even though she'd never been a smoker, about 20% of women diagnosed with lung cancer have never smoked.
I didn't know that statistic until I read this yesterday about Kathy Griffin. Getting lung cancer when you're not even a smoker is like such a cruel and twisted cosmic joke almost. It's just horrible. Luckily for her, they caught this early, which I understand is difficult with lung cancer because the early symptoms are often not very visible. And Griffin, she also in this interview with ABC News revealed an addiction to pills that led to a suicide attempt in the wake of that controversy from a few years ago when she held that fake severed head of former President Donald Trump. I think it was like on a magazine cover or something. Anyway, that was a stunt that effectively ended her career and really had her in a downward spiral that she's just now sort of talking about publicly.
All right, well, hopefully she'll be okay. And I agree about lung cancer. I mean, to get lung cancer, and no one deserves to get lung cancer. My uncle has it. It's horrific. But as a non-smoker to get lung cancer, it like you said, it sounds like a cruel, twisted joke. All right, Carlo, your sound is much better, so whatever you did, it worked.
Okay, thank you.
You sound and look great. And that is what you need to know for Tuesday, August 3rd.
Okay, guys, see you tomorrow.